"Put that back, get out now," Earl Maddox barked like a guard dog of power that had just caught the scent of black skin in his store, and then the bell over the door rang, and Layla Benton said, "Touch him again, and I'll turn this slap into a case the whole city will hear." Noah Reed only needed candles. The corner store's bell jittered as he pushed the door open, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a paper list folded in his palm. The after-work crowd hummed. Cool air breathed over scuffed tile. A rack of day-old doughnuts slumped beside the register. He scanned for the birthday aisle, thinking about his fourth graders, the frosting they'd smear across desks tomorrow, the lopsided chorus they'd croon for Tasha, who had finally stopped hiding her gap-toothed smile. "Can I help you?" the owner called without looking up. It was the tone, not a question, an audit. Earl Maddox, with his white apron stained the color of old coffee, his jaw set like a gate with a thick chain through it. Noah had lived in this neighborhood 6 years. He knew the walk you did in certain stores. Elbows in, eyes soft, wallet ready, receipt visible. "Just candles," Noah said. "The rainbow ones, if you have them." A teenage cashier, Riley, shy, freckles strung across the nose like constellations, lifted a finger toward aisle 4. Noah nodded thanks and slipped down the shelves, smelling of bleach and sugar. He picked up the pack, 10 little wax sticks that looked like sparks you could hold. He was halfway back to the counter when Earl moved into his lane. "You planning to pay for that?" Noah blinked. "Of course." Earl jerked his chin toward Noah's pocket. "What did you put in there?" "My phone," Noah said, pulling it out. His voice stayed level, the way he taught his kids to breathe when the classroom filled with heat. "Sir, I'm buying the candles." A man at the lottery stand turned his head. A mother paused by the refrigerators, one palm on a toddler's curls. The room gathered, quiet, bending around the question everyone in this city had been taught to ask without sound. Is this going to be one of those moments? "Empty your pockets," Earl said. Noah's jaw worked. "I'm not going to do that." Earl stepped closer. "Then get out." "I'll pay," Noah said again, trying to place the candles on the counter to make the ritual undeniable. His fingertips touched the laminate and Earl's palm struck his face. The sound was a split branch. Noah's head swept right, cheek blazing. His hand dropped the candles. They rolled with tiny clacks like bones. Riley gasped. The toddler began to cry. Somewhere a bottle toppled and spun. Noah tasted metal and heat and the sudden whirlwind of choices. He'd given entire units on de-escalation to 9-year-olds. He had words for them, old soft cloth he could toss over sparks. But the slap had reached inside his chest and shaken something loose. He steadied himself on the counter and straightened one vertebra at a time. "Sir," he said, and felt his voice lift from a deeper place, "you just assaulted me." "Get out of my store," Earl snarled, eyes bright with something Noah knew too well. The relief of flipped power, the thrill of making someone smaller. "Thieves don't get to talk." A phone rose from the end of aisle 2. The young man holding it, Deshaun, from the barber shop next door, met Noah's eyes and nodded once. He had that look that said, "I've got you." The mother by the refrigerators was dialing, thumb shaking. The bell jittered again. Attorney Layla Benton crossed the threshold in long strides, her blazer unbuttoned, curls pinned back, face already scanning the room like a field surgeon. She had texted Noah 5 minutes ago, "I'm around the corner. Swing by after your errand," and he had typed back the word candles with a smiling emoji. Now her gaze took in the welt blooming on his cheek, the rainbow pack on the floor, the way Earl's hand still hung in the air like a threat that hadn't been lowered. "Noah?" Layla asked, but she didn't need the answer. Earl tried to square himself toward her. "We don't need troublemakers." Layla's voice cut cleanly across his. "Riley, sweetie, can you please check if your CCTV records audio, and don't touch anything?" "Ma'am, thank you for calling 911. Please tell them there's been an assault and that an attorney is on scene. Deshaun, keep filming. Noah, don't move." "Earl." She turned to him fully, and her eyes went flat as courtroom glass. If you take one step closer to my cousin, I will instruct him to press charges on the spot." Earl's mouth worked, soundless, caught between shock and the old mythology that had always protected him. Layla turned back to Noah. "Low now, private. You breathing?" He nodded, a small, crooked motion. "Okay, we make a record," she said. "We make them see." Somewhere far away, a siren began to grow. The store's humming fluorescent seemed suddenly too loud, as if they resented having to illuminate this. Noah's cheek throbbed with each beat of his heart. He could feel the shape of Earl's palm on his skin like a brand, and inside that pain, something else was uncoiling a long animal quiet that had slept for years. "Start with your name," Layla said softly, standing shoulder to shoulder with him so her body made a second wall around his. "Say it for the camera." Noah lifted his eyes to Deshawn's lens. "My name is Noah Reed," he said, voice steadying as it found its path. "I came to buy candles for a student's birthday. The owner of this store, Earl Maddox, accused me of stealing and slapped me in the face." There was the truth, plain as white tile. The bell jittered once more. The door whined open for two uniformed officers, stepping into a new kind of room, one where everything had already begun to be written down. And somewhere in the city, before they even finished taking statements, the first share hit the timeline. By the time Noah and Layla stepped onto the sidewalk, the evening had turned the street the color of bruised plums. Sirens had become paperwork. The bright aggression of a moment had been swallowed by forms with boxes that never quite fit a human. Earl had folded his arms and stared at a point over Layla's shoulder while the officers measured distance and tone and the legal contour of a hand. "The video," Layla said, once they were outside. "We need copies, Deshawn." He handed her his number, still filming, the red dot blinking like a heartbeat. "Already uploaded a backup," he said. "Private link." "Until you say." "You're a saint," Layla said, meaning it. She had placed herself between Noah and any potential kindness, because kindness can be dangerous when you're still bleeding. It can make you let go of the rope too soon. Now she turned to him. "Urgent care first. Then we talk strategy." "I'm okay," Noah said. His cheek was a crescent moon, swelling. The word okay felt ridiculous, like a sticker slapped on a cracked window. "You're getting examined," she said, and not unkindly. "Documentation is not a favor to us." It's a language they listen to. They walked. The night smelled like rain and old gum. Noah kept replaying the moment his head snapped, the way the store hushed after. There had been a silence like the pause between inhale and exhale, the space where something ends and another thing considers beginning. "Do you remember the exact words he used?" Layla asked as they reached the clinic's sliding doors. "Empty your pockets," Noah said. "Then get out of my store. Then thieves don't get to talk." He swallowed. "I can still hear it." Layla nodded. "Good, I mean not good. Precise." She slipped her card to the nurse at intake, whose eyes softened when she saw Noah's face. "We'd like photographs appended to the chart," Layla said in the kind of voice that makes systems remember their better selves. "And a written note of patient report." 30 minutes later, Noah sat on butcher paper with a cold pack against his cheek. He watched the fluorescent light turn the edge of Layla's hair to a thin river of silver. He remembered her at 13, arguing with the principal until he apologized for accusing Noah of cheating on a history exam because he'd used the word palimpsest. She had been reciting cases since she was 16, the smallest person at Thanksgiving, but the one who could make the room go quiet. "It's not just me," Noah said, staring at the poster of the human skull on the wall, the extra bones drawn in ghostly blue overlay. "He's probably done this to other people. Maybe worse." Layla exhaled, a sound like a match. "I agree. If there's a pattern, we'll find it. We'll file a civil suit for battery discrimination under the state public accommodations law and violation of our city's bias harassment ordinance. We'll push the DEA for misdemeanor assault charges, and we'll work the court of public opinion with sense, not fire." "What does sense look like?" Noah asked. "Not letting them make this about your reaction," she said. "We keep the story where it belongs. A man with power put his hand on a customer because he thought he could. We show the consequences of that choice. We amplify other voices if they come. We ask for people to act with purpose, reviews, complaints to licensing, boycott if needed. But we don't torch the place because if we do, they'll point at the flames, not at the hand." The doctor came, brisk and kindly. He spoke of soft tissue injury and swelling protocols, of ibuprofen and rest. He documented per Layla's gentle insistence the pattern of the mark, the redness, the tenderness to palpation, the absence of fracture. He printed copies. He wished them luck in a voice that understood luck was a poor plan, but often the only one available. Outside, rain had started. The drops were fat, warm, as if the sky had gotten angry on Noah's behalf, and then decided to cry instead. Noah's phone buzzed. His principal. "Are you okay?" "I just saw." Then, "We've got your back." He swallowed around something that rose and burned. "My kids," he said. "Tomorrow." "I'll come early," Layla said. "We'll talk to them together. Age appropriate. You can say you got hurt by someone who made a bad choice, and that you're doing the right things to make it right." She touched his shoulder. "We're going to make this bigger than a slap, Noah. Not louder, bigger." "Bigger how?" "By telling the whole story," she said, eyes steady. "The one that started long before today and can end differently because you refuse to bow your head." Across the street, the store's sign flickered. Earl was probably home by now, kissing his wife on the cheek, telling a version of the night in which he was a beleaguered guardian of a rule. Noah pictured his own apartment, the book on his coffee table, the half-finished lesson plan, the plant he always forgot to water until it looked like prayer. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A low voice. "My name's Louis. I used to stock shelves at Maddox. Saw the video. He hit me once, too. I got fired when I complained. If you're building a case, I'll talk." Noah met Layla's eyes. The rain ticked on the awning. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, as if narrating the future, "we start a list." By morning, the video had passed through the city like weather. It wasn't the worst thing people had seen, which made it both easier and harder. The mind was a muscle that developed calluses. But the angle clear, close, undeniable, the crack of impact recorded by 2 microphones, and 3 human flinches, made it stick. At 7:15, Aimee stood at the whiteboard in Noah's classroom. She had drawn a simple column. Incidents on the left, proof on the right. Beneath incidents, she had written lease struck by Earl, 2023. Customer racial epithet, 2022. Delivery driver refused service, 2024. The emails had come all night. Some were named. Some were anonymous and raw, ink still wet with fear. "You don't have to be here," Noah said, adjusting the desks his kids had pushed into an imperfect circle. His cheek was still a bloom of purple and red. The room smelled like dry erase markers and the faint sour of yesterday's milk. "I want to be," Layla said. "Also, I promised your principal I'd talk to the kids." They did it in plain language. Accidents versus bad choices. Boundaries of touch. How to speak up safely. The kids asked the kinds of questions that leave adults either better or humbler. Did it hurt a lot? Are you mad? What happens to the man now? Tasha, whose candles had been the point of the errand, walked up after and hugged Noah's waist, without looking at his face, which was exactly the kind of mercy he needed. When the final bell finished its little slide whistle, Layla and Noah crossed the street to a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and ambition. Luis waited in the corner, nervous, eyes flicking to the door every time it opened. "Thank you for coming," Layla said, sliding into the booth opposite him. "I'm recording audio. Is that okay?" He nodded. She placed her phone on the table between them, as if setting down a tiny witness. Luis's story came in starts. He had moved to the city from El Salvador at 19, worked double shifts, sent money home. Earl had hired him because he didn't ask for benefits. When a customer told Lise to go back where he came from, Earl had laughed. When Louise stocked shelves too slowly, Earl had pinched his upper arm hard. Once, when Louise called in sick, Earl had told him he was just like the rest of them, and the phrase had stuck in Luce's throat like a fishbone. The night Earl slapped him, it had been over a broken jar of pasta sauce. "It was an accident," Louise said. "But he said I did it on purpose to make him look bad." "Do you have texts, pay stubs, anything with dates?" Layla asked. Louise slid a small envelope across. Inside, a photo of the bruise on his arm, a text from Earl that said, "Don't come back," a schedule scribbled with hours. Enough to begin drawing lines between dots. By noon, they had 3 more names. A delivery driver from last winter, whose phone had recorded Earl saying, "We don't take your kind after dark." A grandmother who had been followed around the store while Earl stood too close, humming something that sounded like mockery. A high schooler who had been told to put her backpack at the counter, because girls like you like free stuff. "Patterns," Layla murmured, eyes on the board back in Noah's classroom. She had added dates, arrows, the kind of grammar juries love. "We can make a hostile environment claim on top of battery and discrimination. Maybe even go after his business license for repeated violations." "What if people say it's just a slap?" Noah asked, the late afternoon light turning the dust motes into constellations between them. "They will," Layla said simply. "We'll answer with a story of the body keeping score, how every time you walk into a store like that, you carry yourself smaller to survive. We'll answer with the people who didn't complain, because complaining costs money you don't have, hours you can't spare, a kind of courage that is finite. We'll show that this slap was a door swinging open on a room full of other hands." Noah nodded, jaw set. "And we'll be ready when they try to make me angrier than I am." Layla smiled with half her mouth. "Anger is information. We'll translate it into action." By evening, the storefront wore 2 new signs. On the door, "Closed for inventory." On the lamp post outside, a flyer announcing a community forum at the church down the block, "Know Your Rights," featuring attorney Layla Benton. Refreshments provided by the PTA. Earl watched from between his blinds as people read the flyer. He had spent the day on the phone with a lawyer whose voice was smooth and impatient. Earl had told him the version of the story that made him less small. The lawyer had said words like mitigate and optics and counter-narrative. He had told Earl not to post on Facebook, not to talk to reporters, to take down the sign about shoplifting being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, because it looked too much like a dare. At 9 p.m., Earl opened a beer, took 2 swallows, and stood in his kitchen wiping the same spot on the counter for a long time. His wife asked if he was coming to bed. He said in a voice that didn't sound like his, "They're trying to ruin me." She didn't answer. The house felt drafty, as if a window somewhere had been left open to a storm that hadn't arrived yet. Down the street, Noah sat on his couch, with the cold pack against his cheek, and the sound off on the TV. He scrolled, then stopped scrolling because emotion made his stomach clench. Layla texted, "Forum looks packed already. You ready for lights?" He typed, "Been ready longer than I knew." The church basement had never held so many different kinds of silence. There was the silence of people who had stories but no practice telling them. The silence of people who had listened for years and were tired of listening. The silence of men who wanted to defend someone they loved and weren't sure how. Folding chairs squealed. Styrofoam cups bent. Layla stood at the front in a navy suit that looked like a promise. Behind her, a projector showed the words Public Accommodations Law in clean font, then the line that mattered. Businesses open to the public must serve customers without discrimination based on race, color, national origin, or religion. To her right, Pastor Elena kept a clock in the corner of her eye, the way all good pastors do. "We're here tonight," Layla began, "because a man was struck when he tried to buy candles. We're also here because a lot of you have said, privately, and now publicly, that you felt smaller in that store for a long time. Law is one way we fix things. Community is another. We are going to do both." Hands rose. The first story came haltingly from an older woman with perfect lipstick. "He followed me," she said. "He didn't say anything, just followed. I left and cried in my car." A murmur lifted and fell. A young man in a delivery uniform spoke about the night he had to walk 2 extra blocks because Earl refused to unlock the back door at 10 p.m., even though policy allowed deliveries until midnight. "He called me boy," the young man said, and then looked at the floor as if looking up would split something in him. Layla wrote each story on a legal pad, in a script that turned grief into evidence. "If you're willing," she said to each speaker, "I'd like to take a formal statement. You are not required to testify in any future proceeding. Telling the truth here is already part of the repair." Noah watched from the second row. When it was his turn, he stood and faced his neighbors. "I teach your kids," he said, and heard the room exhale. "I bought snacks here when I first moved to the city because it was close and cheap. I let a lot of small things slide because sliding is easier. Yesterday, I got slapped. I don't want any of your kids to think that's normal. That's why I'm here." A hand shot up in the back. A man with a worn baseball cap, voice gruff. "So what do we do? Boycott? March?" Pastor Elena lifted a palm. "We will not punish the cashier who needs rent," she said, and the room nodded. "We will not let rage do the thinking for us." Layla clicked to the next slide. Options. "Here's what we propose. File complaints with the city's Civil Rights Commission forms are on the table. Write statements. If you can afford to, shop elsewhere for now. We'll publish a list of alternatives, including bodegas owned by folks in this room. If you can't afford it, I'll personally coordinate a voucher program with church funds. And we'll create a neighborhood watch for businesses not to surveil, but to document and protect. We'll de-economize harm." Someone laughed, surprised and relieved. "De-economize? Make it no longer profitable to be cruel," Layla said simply. They broke into groups. At the back of the room, a reporter with a notebook hovered. Layla gave him 2 quotes and a time to call tomorrow for more. Luce signed his statement with a hand that shook less than it had at noon. A teenager drew a poster that said, "Dignity is legal," written in bubble letters. Earl arrived at the end, hovering at the doorway like fog. He had told himself he wouldn't come, but the parking lot had filled with cars, and his curiosity was a wire that hummed. He watched Noah speaking to a cluster of parents. Layla bent over her legal pad, the pastor hugging a woman who had cried into her good blouse. For a moment he felt like a man peering through his own window, at a party he hadn't been invited, to the kind he'd always told himself he didn't want, because wanting makes rejection dangerous. Layla looked up and saw him. Their eyes met across the room. She didn't beckon, and she didn't look away. She simply let him see himself reflected in a room that had built itself without him. Earl left, cheeks hot, stomach churning. As he walked to his truck, his lawyer called. "You need to show contrition," the lawyer said. "Issue an apology. Volunteer to attend bias training. Make a donation." "I'm not a racist," Earl said, as if saying it was proof. "Then prove it with choices," the lawyer said, impatient again. "Because right now the story isn't yours." Earl hung up and sat with his hands on the steering wheel for a long time, the rubber groaning under his grip, the night humming with 1,000 small, honest sounds he'd never really heard. 2 weeks later, in a courtroom paneled with wood, polished by years of elbows and regret, Noah took the stand. The DA had filed misdemeanor assault. Layla's civil suit had been assigned a judge with a reputation for patience and a low tolerance for theatrics. Earl sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't fit his shoulders, his eyes pinned to a spot near the water pitcher. The prosecutor's questions were careful steps. Where were you standing? What did he say? How did it feel? Noah answered with the exactness Layla had insisted on, staying close to the facts, letting the narrative place itself on the rails she'd laid. When the prosecutor was done, Earl's attorney rose. "Mr. Reed," he said, voice smooth as a clean floor, "you say my client accused you of stealing. Could it be that he merely asked a question, given that you had in your pocket He told me to empty my pockets, Noah said. Perhaps you misheard. The lawyer suggested, and somewhere behind him a person in the gallery made a sound like disbelief turned into air. The video has audio, Noah said. You can hear him. The lawyer smiled. Ah, yes, the video, recorded by a friend of yours. A neighbor, Noah said. Someone presumably on your side. Someone who recorded what happened, Noah said, and Layla's eyes flicked to him with the smallest glint of pride. The lawyer tried angles. Had Noah ever had a negative interaction with Earl before? Had he ever left without buying? Had he ever been irritated in the store, perhaps raising his voice? Noah answered, no, 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 and when the lawyer asked if Noah thought it was possible that Earl's hand had simply brushed his face in a moment of confusion, Noah let the room hold the silence before he said, no, and the word hung there like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Layla's turn on cross felt like a violin entering after a drum. She called Louis, and his story laid another plank across the river. She entered into evidence the text about not coming back. She called the delivery driver, and the courtroom listened to the clip where Earl's voice said, "We don't take your kind," after dark, and the oxygen in the room seemed to drop 2 degrees. She called the grandmother, and when the defense lawyer tried to paint her as oversensitive, Layla said, "Do we really want to stand here in 2025 and put a woman's feelings on trial for being followed?" The judge gave a long, flat look that said, "Choose your next words with care." Then Layla did something unexpected. She called Riley, the cashier. Riley walked in, wearing the only dress shirt he owned, and fear like a second garment. "I still work there," he said into the microphone, voice small, "but I'm looking for something else." Layla's questions were gentle. Did Earl have rules about who to follow? Did he ever instruct staff to search certain customers? Riley glanced at Earl, then back. He'd say, "Watch the teens in hoodies." He'd say, "Keep an eye on the dark ones at night." He'd say to me, "You're soft, Riley. Don't let them get away with it." The defense objected. Hearsay. The judge overruled. Pattern and practice. The jurors shifted, some with faces closing like books being finished. Earl's lawyer calculated in real time the distance between apology and loss and saw that one road was still open and the other was starting to flood. When it was over for the day, outside on the steps, reporters gathered like pigeons. Layla spoke of accountability without glee. Noah declined to speak, which made the camera love him more. Earl tried to say the word misunderstanding into a microphone, and it came out like a cough. That night, Layla and Noah sat at his kitchen table under the yellow cone of a lamp. Between them, transcripts, copies, a bowl with 3 clementines, as if the table that held the fight needed to also hold something sweet. "You were good," Layla said, "clear, human." "I didn't mean to cry," Noah said, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. "You cried like a person," she said, "not like a tactic." He nodded, then laughed without humor. "Do I want him to go to jail?" He asked the ceiling. "Do I want him to lose his store?" "I don't even know." "You want the harm to be named," Layla said, peeling a clementine with careful thumbs. "And then you want a world where harm is less likely tomorrow. Sometimes that looks like punishment. Sometimes it looks like transformation. Sometimes both." He watched her separate each crescent and place it in a circle on the napkin, the way their grandmother used to, as if order could make sweetness last longer. He thought about Earl sitting somewhere with his tie loosened, a man at the end of a map he'd drawn for himself without noticing the rivers. "Tomorrow's closings," Layla said, and her voice had steel under it. "Then the civil case, which has more room for repair than just a conviction ever could." "What does repair look like?" he asked. Layla looked at the circle of clementines and then at him. "You'll know it when you can walk into a store for candles and only think about cake." The verdict on the criminal charge came down just after lunch, guilty of misdemeanor assault. The judge sentenced Earl to probation, mandatory bias training, 200 hours of community service at the city's food bank, and a fine that made his mouth go dry. Outside, the cameras waited for fireworks and got weather instead. A slow, soaking rain of sentences that sounded like consequences rather than revenge. 2 months later, in the civil suit, something else happened. Layla had filed for damages, medical, emotional distress, punitive. She had demanded policy changes at the store if it was to remain open, signage making non-discrimination explicit, staff training by a third-party firm approved by the commission, a zero-tolerance policy for harassment with a posted hotline, and quarterly community oversight meetings held in the church basement with coffee and folding chairs and a clock watched by Pastor Elena. She had also, quietly, built a proposal with the PTA and a local co-op. If Earl wanted, he could sell the store at a fair price and leave with dignity. The neighborhood would buy it together. On the morning closing arguments were scheduled, Earl's lawyer asked for a recess. When they returned, Earl stood, throat-working, a man picking up words that weighed more than he'd trained for. His wife sat behind him, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Riley sat 2 rows back, untucked shirt-tail, hope he didn't dare speak yet, in his eyes. "I did this," Earl said, voice hoarse. "I slapped him. I said things I shouldn't say. I made people feel small to make myself feel big." He glanced at Noah, then looked down. "I grew up being told certain stories. I didn't question them. That doesn't excuse anything. It's just the truth about how I got here." He swallowed. "I don't want to be this kind of man anymore." The room held its breath. Confession is not exoneration. It is an entrance to a corridor where work can happen. Layla rose. "Mr. Maddox has agreed to sell the store to a neighborhood cooperative," she said, eyes scanning the courtroom to make sure every ear heard it right. "He will donate 10% of the proceeds to a fund that supports small businesses owned by people of color in this district. He will attend restorative justice sessions facilitated by the commission, with those he harmed given the choice to participate or not. He will issue a public apology, no excuses, no passive voice. And he will, for as long as he remains in this city, spend 2 Saturdays a month at the food bank until the hours of his sentence are done, then keep going if he chooses." She paused. "In exchange, Mr. Reed has agreed to settle for damages that will cover his costs and contribute to the new co-op's startup fund." The judge's eyebrows rose, the expression people get when they see a bridge they didn't know was possible. Noah stood, and the room heard the rustle of fabric like a tiny storm. "I didn't ask to be made into a cause," he said. "I wanted to buy candles. But if this is the road I'm on, I want the road to lead somewhere other than another headline. I accept the settlement. I want a store on that corner where my students can walk in and be treated like they already belong." "It won't erase what happened," the judge said, voice gentler than the wood around her. "But it might build something in its place that is stronger than before." In the months after, the sign changed. Maddox Market came down, leaving a clean rectangle of wall. In its place, Rainbow Co-op, painted by the teenagers who had drawn "Dignity is Legal," their bubble letters now steady on brick. Inside, the aisles were the same and entirely different. The fluorescent lights seemed to hum in a kinder key. A bulletin board near the door held notices for jobs and tutoring and dishwashers for sale. On the counter, a jar read "Community Fund," and sometimes the cashier Riley got promoted to manager emptied it and found more money than he expected, folded into shapes that looked like thanks. On opening day, Noah walked in with his class. Tasha was taller, her gap smaller. They stood in a semicircle by the balloons and sang a song they'd written about cupcakes and courage. Layla stood in the back, hands in her pockets, face soft for the first time in months. Luis stalked the cereal aisle, whistling, a name tag that said Luis in bright marker, hours with benefits on the schedule. Earl came at dusk when the crowd had thinned, cap in hand, shoulders smaller without the weight of the keys. He paused at the door, reading the new sign twice, as if to make sure it would still say the same thing when he looked again. Noah saw him and stepped forward. The air between them seemed crowded with versions of a handshake and versions of a fight. They stood there, 2 men at a new threshold. "I'm sorry," Earl said, quiet and unperformative, as if the word had finally been sanded down until it fit his mouth without splinters. "I thought I was protecting something." "I was just protecting a lie." Noah let the words hang. He had learned over the last months that the silence after an apology is where the real work is, the place where you decide whether to leave a door cracked. "Thank you for saying it," he said finally. "It doesn't make it okay, but it matters." Earl nodded, eyes bright in the blue hour. "If you'll have me, I'd like to volunteer here sometimes. Stock shelves, clean floors." Noah surprised himself by smiling. "We can always use hands," he said. "Bring gloves. The bleach is strong." They stood for a moment longer. Earl looked at the candles near the counter, the rainbow pack placed deliberately at eye level. He reached into his pocket, pulled out 5 crumpled dollars, and set them in the community jar without drama. When he left, the bell over the door made a sound that no longer felt like an alarm. Later that night, after the last kid had gone home sugared and tired, Noah locked up and stood in the aisle alone. He picked up a pack of candles, ran his thumb over the smooth wax. He thought of the slap, the way pain had opened a door he hadn't chosen. He thought of lists and forums and cross-examinations and clementines placed like moons. He thought of the small, loud sound of a community making itself real. He set the candles back on the shelf. Tomorrow someone would buy them for a cake, and it would be just that, tiny flames, a song off-key, wax tears that meant nothing more than joy cooling on frosting. That, he thought, was what repair felt like, not erasure, but the chance to be ordinary where once you had been a lesson. Outside, the street was the color of a bruise healing. The sign above the door glowed, and when Noah turned the key, the new lock clicked with the clean satisfaction of a door that knew, finally, what it was for.